Well, for the sake of time, we will just jump right in and get started. Good evening, TRED members, partners, and friends. I am Jessica Carlsruhe, the Executive Director of the Texas Real Estate Advocacy and Defense Coalition, also known as TRED. And for those of you who are new to TRED, we are a bipartisan, member-based organization that advocates for and defends Texas landowners' rights at the state and local levels. And I am proud to welcome you to this evening's candidate forum with Texas Railroad Commission candidates. The 2020 primary runoffs will be held on July 14th with early voting starting June 29th through July 10th. And here with us this evening are the two Democratic candidates, Roberto "Beto" Alonzo and Chrysta Castaneda. And we welcome you both here tonight, so thank you so much for joining us. Jim Wright, the Republican candidate, was also invited but did not confirm. Without further ado, I will turn it over to our moderator for this evening, Scott Braddock, who is a journalist, political analyst, and editor of the Quorum Report, which is a nonpartisan newsletter focused on Texas politics and government. So Scott, we thank you so much for joining us tonight as our moderator, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, Jessica, thank you. And we'll just make our way through this, whether there's technical difficulties or whatever. If anybody gets cut off, we'll just come right back to you. If anybody has difficult hearing, if you can't hear somebody, just let us know and we'll try to correct that as quick as we can, whether we're masked up or not. It's been cliche, right, to say these are unprecedented times. I think we've gotten to the point where we all get it, right? And just today, Governor Abbott was saying that we're reporting record numbers, up to 5,000 cases, new cases of coronavirus, COVID-19 here in Texas. And that is shaping all debates. 20 years of doing news now, I have never seen a story. The only thing I can sort of compare it to is hurricanes on the Gulf Coast, where it would just affect everything, but that would only be for that one region, right? So you really can't even compare it to that. This affects everything, our state, our country, our world, and certainly the industry that both of you would like to oversee if you're elected as railroad commissioner, right? And so we'll drill down on some of those issues, but I think just let's start broadly with that and your thoughts on it, because if you're going to be a statewide elected official in Texas, certainly you're going to be asked about these things, and your opinions about these things will help inform decisions that you make. Ms. Castaneda, I would start with you first. Your thoughts on this pandemic and the recession and the civil unrest in America. Just very broadly, what do you think? What are your thoughts right now?
Yeah, I mean, it is, I'm 57 and I've never seen anything like it. Let me just put it that way. I particularly, apropos to the Railroad Commission, which of course has not one thing to do with railroads, it has everything to do with oil and gas. I've never seen a time like this in the oil and gas industry. I came out of engineering school in the 1980s, in the peak, in the lowest part of one of the downturns. And so I have seen many ups and downs in my 30 plus years of work in and around the oil and gas industry, both as an attorney and as an engineer. This time is unprecedented, but it's an unprecedented time from the standpoint of we have an opportunity. We have an opportunity to do better at the Texas Railroad Commission, better for all Texans. Here's why. We're looking at each other on Zoom. We are not driving to be together and debate in a public forum. So demand for gas is down, demand for oil and gas is down, and we are oversupplied. Companies are turning off the taps, they're going out of business, and they are displacing and laying off hundreds of thousands is the predicted number by the time that this is all over. But what we have the opportunity in this very challenging time to do is figure out how to do better with some of the fundamental jobs of the Texas Railroad Commission. What are those fundamental jobs? Well, the number one job of the Texas Railroad Commission for over 100 years is to prevent the waste of our natural resources. Another important and fundamental job of the Texas Railroad Commission is to make sure that we protect our environment. And another fundamental job is to make sure that we ensure the health and safety of oil and gas operations. We have an opportunity to bring together about half of the industry who believes those things are important with our environmental segments and our environmentally minded voters. And in fact, 80% of Texans, according to the Texas Tribune, believe that in the environmental protection of Texans, water, air, and soil is a fundamental issue, and we need to be doing it. Unprecedented time, unprecedented opportunity. I am the candidate who knows how to do better at the Texas Railroad Commission based on my experience, and I look forward to being in there and doing this job come January to make sure that we're doing what we need to be doing.
All right, Mr. Alonzo, I'd ask the same question. What do you think about where we are in the midst of this pandemic and the economic, hopefully, recovery that we can get into at some point soon? We're trying to open up the state now. The governor says he's trying to do that, but at the same time, we have record numbers of cases reported just today.
How you doing?
Good, sir.
I start off with a mask, and I know, like you said, we're in our homes, so we don't need to do it. But the reason I talk about it is because, as you pointed out, today 5,000 cases. I'll tell you this: when my daughter was born 32 years ago, one of the things we did when we announced her birth was also boycott grapes. I grew up in Crystal City, Texas, where we grew up in the Chicano movement, protests like we're doing right now, for rights like we're doing right now, and also to talk about what are the issues of the day. And that's what we did. I hope she doesn't get mad at me, but you know, I love her, still love her. She's my favorite daughter, but it was also sharing thoughts that we had at the moment. So right now, I'm gonna start with the mask and end the debate with the mask. Why? Because you point out, we gotta stay concentrated on what is the most important. Is it oil and gas? Is it the environment? Is it jobs? It's our health. You know, there's a saying in Spanish, salud, dinero y amor, health, money, and life. If we don't take care of our health, then what about all the other issues? So yes, sir, we're gonna focus, we know the issues. I congratulate this organization for focusing on people's property rights, on making sure it's affordable, making sure it's right, making sure they're protected. And yeah, we're gonna talk about the other issues, about the water, about the environment, because it's critical. But in the end, the thing that you point out and you started your comments, it's about health. If we don't take care of our health, folks, then what are we gonna do with the rest of the issue? So yes, I consider it important. The civil unrest, yes, people are concerned. I mean, it's, you know, high time. I was in a Tarrant County debate the other day, and we were talking about West Texas and rural Texas. And the moderator had run for a railroad commission 4 years ago or so, and he had said he had run around the state like we run around the state. And I said, okay, for rural Texas, what's the population of Hispanics in Hereford, Texas? He goes, well, I said, I'm just asking because you said you went. Well, it's 90%. So the key thing here is knowing our environment, knowing our people, knowing the issues. Health is critical right now. Running for railroad commissioner, yes. It's not about railroads, it's about oil and gas. I sponsor legislation to change the name of the Railroad Commission to oil and gas so people can know. So yes,
that didn't work out.
Thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah, they didn't want to do that, did they? Change that that name of the Railroad Commission. Maybe they'll come back to that debate at some point. It's an
no, well, I'll tell you,
because so
one
many
of the
people don't
things
even
I
know what the
got
Railroad
told
Commission
was
does as a result of having a name that people don't get. You know, look, as you said, it regulates oil and gas, and because of the economic problems that were already there with the price of oil dropping, with the Saudi and Russia price war that was going on, that was compounded, of course, by the fact that, you know, in a nutshell, basically, you could fill up your car for almost nothing, but you couldn't go anywhere, right? That was the oil and gas industry in a nutshell, right? then you have the debate about whether the government, in the form of the Railroad Commission, should intervene in that situation and do what they call proration, basically try to control the amount of production. I would start with you this time, Mr. Alonzo, and what you thought about that whole debate, where you would have been on that, how would you have voted on that? Obviously, there was a lot of pushback from the industry.
Well, of course, and that's one of the key things I've talked about. We need to get a perspective on the Railroad Commission that's a governing perspective, that's, thinks about all the issues, healthcare, the environment, COVID, civil unrest, all these things. We need to put somebody in the Railroad Commission that looks at all the issues. We don't need more people that work for the Railroad Commission, that have worked for the Railroad Commission, because right now, the oil and gas companies run the show. The oil and gas companies decide the pipelines. The oil and gas companies decide what permits are decided. Right now, the Railroad Commission set up a task force. And who did they put on the task force? Oil and gas companies. Oil and gas companies. Let me tell you, as it relates to the question that you're talking about, there's been a lot of research by a lot of folks as it relates to that. But I'll tell you, as you talk about the drop in prices, yeah. The Railroad Commission deals with oil and gas. As you pointed out, as state elected officials, we give our point of view, we give our opinions, and it makes me think, because of what you're saying. In 2003, as I came back to the state legislature, I was in the prison committee, the probation committee, and we were down $11 billion. And we got a call from a judge in El Paso that said, you guys are saying there's no money. And I got a guy in front of me that can get probation, means he stays out of jail. I can send him to prison. But if you tell me you're not going to have probation money, I'm going to send him to prison so we can monitor him. So as it relates to what you're talking about, as a railroad commissioner, as a state official, we give opinions. And I think we need to have an opinion from the public perspective, from a government perspective, and we respect the oil and gas companies, but we got to have our seat at the table. And I believe I'm that person with the background that I have in governing for 20 years as a state representative to fulfill that position.
And Ms. Castaneda, your thoughts on that, on government intervention in these situations? Obviously, the industry, there was a slice of the industry that was in favor of the Railroad Commission stepping in, but the overwhelming majority of those folks who had signed up, and that was a Zoom hearing as well, by the way, the Zoom meeting as well, where they listened to hours of testimony, mostly from those companies that did not want to see that happen.
I sat through all, I think it was 10 hours of
10 or 11
testimony
hours.
on May the 5th. Yeah. So proration for the audience. The Texas Railroad Commission was actually the very first OPEC. And what does OPEC do? It controls the production of the oil in Saudi Arabia and other countries like that to make sure that they are not oversupplying the market. The Texas Railroad Commission has had this ability since the 1920s. In fact, the time that this was used the most was in the 1930s, right after the Great Depression, because people weren't using oil. Again, back to the number one job of the Texas Railroad Commission is to prevent the waste of our natural resources, and proration is an important tool in that toolkit. I was published in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram as being in favor of proration because free markets, we all believe in free markets, except when free markets don't work. And free markets didn't work well in the pandemic. We have an oversupply of oil. We don't have anybody to take it. And instead of actually enacting the historical functions of the railroad commissioners decided to do something unprecedented and very frightening. And that was to suspend the rules for underground storage. Because we don't have any place to put the oil, they decided to allow them to store oil in places where it has never historically been stored. The safety impacts of that are still being evaluated. Rather, the better thing to have done was to side with the portion of industry that said, you know what, for right now, we need to cut back on production. We need to not overproduce our oil. We need to keep it in the ground until the situation clears.
Let me get into some of these landowners' issues, the landowners' rights. This coalition obviously very interested in this. And the question of eminent domain is in front of the legislature quite often. It'll be in front of the Railroad Commission quite often. You'll have to look at this. And I would like to start with you, Ms. Castaneda, on what your overall philosophy is about it, because you can ask 10 people this question, you get 10 completely different answers. And in a lot of ways, you get different answers based on what parts of the state people are from,
Right.
what industries they're in, et cetera. So where do you fall on this?
So eminent domain is mostly a pipeline related issue in the current period of time. The railroad, here's why it is so important to elect somebody who actually knows what the business of the Railroad Commission is and how we need to do better, and knows what the oil and gas industry does. The Railroad Commission does not have any jurisdiction over where these pipelines get laid. It has limited jurisdiction over intrastate pipelines, which are the pipelines that are solely within the boundaries of the state of Texas. There's been a challenge to the way you can just check a box and declare yourself to be a common carrier at the Railroad Commission, and thereby claim powers of eminent domain. And just this week, it was ruled that you can't just check that box. You have to actually prove that you are shipping oil and gas from one party to a third party and not to yourself, and therefore Enterprise was declared to not be a common carrier. Why does this matter? It matters because when these common carriers are declared by themselves to be such and can go in and use the powers of eminent domain, they don't have to pay fair market value for the property that they take. They don't have to really exercise transparent processes in terms of where the pipelines are laid and whose properties they're going to cross. They don't have to coordinate with anybody else to make sure it's minimally disruptive. The only way we solve this problem, honestly, is for the Texas legislature to get a handle on it. We have got to have some kind of comprehensive eminent domain and fair condemnation proceedings and transparent condemnation proceedings to address this issue. And that is a legislature issue.
Absolutely. Mr. Alonzo, what do you think? Where are you at on this?
Yeah, in all our debates and all our discussions and all our research, we already know what the answers are. We already know what the debate is. The oil and gas companies, in the end, run what's going on. So why do we have to have more oil and gas company people on the Railroad Commission? That's why I'm happy that this organization is having a discussion and a debate, because what we're talking about, that's correct. There's a lot of laws that do not help the property owner about how the process is done. I believe, and as a legislator, I support it. And the realtors and other realtor organizations came before us. For the 20 years I was there, hey, we need to have an input in how they deal with our property, that they compensated, that they give us an opportunity to have hearings. That is correct. Every time these issues would come up, the oil and gas companies would come in and block. So the answer is yes. I support that we have hearings. I support that we compensate landowners. I support that they have an opportunity. But I'm going to tell you, even if we don't have those rights, the Railroad Commission has an obligation to keep an eye on all these people, on all these pipelines, and all the gas companies. And I'll tell you, the environmentalists, a lot of research where staff would come up and provide information about how they would recommend, but at the end, the Railroad Commission would overturn it. So even though we don't have the rights as railroad commissioners, as a Railroad Commission, that doesn't have nothing to do with railroads, we need to, and it deals with oil and gas, we need to keep an eye on the oil and gas company. And let me tell you, another important part of the debate and discussion, folks, the other part of the debate and discussion is local control. Local control, what does that mean? If the Railroad Commission is not going to keep an eye, then let the local folks, the counties, the cities, the schools keep an eye on these folks. And I'll give you an example. Judge Lina Hidalgo, when there were explosions going on in Houston, in Harris County, there was not enough monitoring. She said, I'll fund it. We'll provide county funds to keep an eye on the explosion about what's going on. So even though, as has been pointed out, and I've been there where we debated these issues, where we try to get more hearings, more transparency, and it was blocked. The key thing, folks, let me remind you, and aside from talking about property, is to fight with all our heart and all our energy that we do not take local control away from our counties and cities so they can have an impact as well.
Well, and that local control issue is a huge one, of course, on multiple fronts in Texas at the moment. The governor fighting with cities and counties on various issues. He's been criticized just this week for the response to COVID-19. Instead of being a partner to cities and counties, has been battling them on certain things, taking their authority away by executive order. But on this question of the Railroad Commission not having a say over these eminent domain issues, should maybe that be changed? Should they have more say over that? What do you think, Ms. Castaneda?
Well, that's certainly, sorry, I was just making sure I was unmuted. That's certainly one possibility. The legislature, again, is going to have to address how and where this issue gets resolved. Right now, we do not have a good solution that's on a statewide basis. And if it belongs under the Railroad Commission, happy to take that on. Another solution might be to have it addressed on a different commission level. For example, ERCOT, you know, those high power lines managed to get laid in a way that is both more transparent and more streamlined, and kind of in a central corridor kind of arrangement. We could do something like that, and maybe there needs to be a commission that deals with pipelines and all other eminent domain issues. There are many ways to skin this cat, but the one thing we can't do is put the cat in a bag and hide it in the trunk and then have it pop out in people's land, and without them time to respond to what's being done to them.
We do have a question from the audience here, and I would just like to remind folks that if you would like to submit a question, as Jessica was reminding you in the chat there, if you didn't have the chat open, if you click on the Q&A box, you can just write a question right there. Annalisa asked this question of both of you. Do you favor regulation of limiting the flaring of natural gas? This was something that the commission was just looking at in the last couple of weeks here. Mr. Alonzo, what do you think about that on the issue of flaring?
Yeah, the answer is yes. I support the regulation of flaring. We need to keep an eye on it. In fact, one of the things that concerns me is that we have enough enforcement. We have enough folks that work for the Railroad Commission to keep an eye on the flaring part. One of the things that's come up from the Railroad Commission is they're saying that they're going to be down about 30% of the budget because of the budget cuts, because of what's going on with the economy. Well, I'll tell you this, that one of the ways we fund, the way we fund the Railroad Commission is from fees from oil and gas companies. We need to stop that. We're the government. We run the show. We need to put the budget, like everybody else, and make sure the Railroad Commission gets funded sufficiently. And if we need more enforcement, then we make sure the folks are there. So the answer is yes, we need to regulate it. And in addition to regulation, if the property owners are being hurt from the flaring, then they should be compensated. But we need to compensate the landowner and monitor the oil and gas companies. So the answer is yes, I believe in regulating them and keeping an eye on them. And if we don't have the funds, we need to make sure we fund the Railroad Commission right. But at the same time, remember, if we're not going to do it, then we also must make sure we don't take the right of local control from the local counties and cities to be able to keep an eye on these folks as well.
Got to hit the unmute. But we did learn this past week from some hot mic moments that the off button is more important than the on button. Ms. Castaneda, what do you think on that question of flaring and regulating that?
So flaring was the reason I decided to run for the Texas Railroad Commission. Among others, I feel like I can offer my unique experience and expertise to the people of Texas and make this commission better for all Texans. But flaring, it was the inception issue for my campaign. We are currently lighting on fire enough natural gas that if we converted it to electricity, it would power the city of Houston. It is an enormous waste. It has been against the law for over 100 years. We don't need more regulation. We need the commissioners to enforce the regulations that have been on the books for over 100 years. And how do they get to do this when it's illegal? exception permits. The commissioners hand out exception permits like they were Tic Tacs. They go on consent agenda and no one ever questions it. That's going to change when I get to the Railroad Commission. I'm going to insist that we not put everything through on consent agenda until at least they have studied the alternatives to the flaring. Now, what are those alternatives? One of the alternatives is to convert the natural gas to electricity right there in the Permian. This has the benefit of not only supplying the electrical needs of the oil and gas operators rather than having them pull electricity out of the grid, but it also, they will be able to generate enough electricity through micro generation sites to power the grid. They will put energy into the grid. They will be able to sell that energy and electricity into the grid and actually send it to Houston to power the city of Houston. And furthermore, we could start a whole new industry out there in the Permian. Right now, we're all looking at each other on Zoom. It takes an enormous amount of extra computing capacity. We need more server farms. We need more computer farms, and putting them in the Permian where there's going to be abundant electricity, not only because of this issue, but also because of wind and solar. It sounds like a great idea. We can have the workers who are being displaced from the oil and gas economy have better, cleaner, more stable jobs in a new industry. That's my idea. And by the way, if we did it, we would eliminate the need for natural gas pipelines.
We have a lot of great questions here in the Q&A box. Ronaldo wants to know your thoughts on the county level enforcement of flaring. Is there somebody doing that? Do you need to be allowing them to do that, give them more flexibility? Local control, once again, is something that people really care about here. Mr. Alonzo, your thoughts on that?
My thought is, again, I'll use the example. Thank you for the question, man. In Houston, Judge Hidalgo, stepped forward and said, hey, I'm going to keep an eye on the oil and gas companies, keep an eye on the explosion. So right now, they're not, from what I saw from that, they're not precluded from it. So again, it stands out. And as you pointed out, the governor, the lieutenant governor, the speaker wanted to do everything in their power in the last session. And I know it's going to come up again. So yes, I believe in the local folks keeping an eye. And I'll tell you, a lot of these answers and discussion, we already have the answers. We already have the research. So I think, the reason we're here, folks, I'm going to tell you, it's not because, we're running, it's because Beto created the idea, the opportunity after spending $80 million and say, Democrats, come on, I'm going to give you an opportunity and I'm going to show that you can win. He lost by about 2.3 points, 2.5, 3 points. So here we are. It's going to give us an opportunity to put a Democrat on the Railroad Commission. But we got to have a candidate. We got to have a Railroad Commission Democrat candidate with Democrat values, with Democrat background, with Democrat voting record that can stand for Democrat people on the Railroad Commission. And I say that, I know you're nonpartisan, but we're the Democratic candidates. Thank you.
Well, you are, and it's interesting that you do have on the other side. Well, let me ask a political question then. That's right in my neighborhood. So you do have a Republican nominee who people had never heard of, right? It sort of comes out of nowhere. He defeats an incumbent who had millions of dollars in the bank, didn't spend much of it, and history of the state is that when the partisan changes happened at the statewide level, it was in the down ballot races. It wasn't up at the top. It was, you could think back to Rick Perry winning the agriculture commissioner's race against Jim Hightower. And in some ways, it's quite a dogfight. Is this where Democrats can punch through? Once again, you're fighting for a seat on a commission that is not even named for the thing that it actually does. So it's sort of obscure to a lot of people. But does it create that kind of opportunity, Ms. Castaneda?
Absolutely. We have an unprecedented opportunity as Democrats in particular to take a seat that's open, no incumbent, no Republican war chest. And in fact, we know that 80% of Texans care about the environmental issues that I'm talking about. And what are those? Clean air, clean water, clean soil. Don't mess with Texas type of stuff. This is an unprecedented opportunity, but it is not a matter of reading a playbook and spouting what you read any more than winning the Dallas Cowboys versus the Giants game is reading the playbook and trying to run those plays. This is a complicated industry. This is a complicated position. It is not a legislative position. It is one that requires knowledge, skill, experience, and I am that candidate. We have an unprecedented opportunity to do something better statewide for all of Texans, even as we know we need to rely on oil and gas for the extended future just because we have such a reliance on oil and gas revenues and taxes. So that's what we have to balance, and that is no small feat.
Yeah, look at some of these other questions here that people are submitting. Again, you can do that right there in the Q&A box. There's some folks who are just expressing frustration over the fact they say oil companies aren't going to, deal with the flaring. They're not going to let anybody come in and do something that's too expensive in their view. This is from Ron in Stephenville. He says that he's got a gas well that was abandoned when a company went bankrupt, and the Railroad Commission refuses to clean it up because they say the old equipment doesn't belong to them. Now it's left to him as a landowner, and a new landowner at that. And he wants to know, shouldn't that be the responsibility of the Railroad Commissioner or the state, in a general sense, as far as, some other similar mechanism? Mr. Alonzo, what would your thought be on that?
I'm going to answer this question, but I'm going to go to the previous question as well about how the Republicans run the show, how the oil and gas companies run the show, how the oil and gas companies. See, if we wanted an oil and gas person, we should let the oil companies decide who should be on the Railroad Commission. They already run the Railroad Commission. They already run the Railroad Commission. So you bring in somebody with experience about oil and gas and sure, we need people on the Railroad Commission that's going to think about what this person just asked about. Think about the big picture, the environment, the property, compensation, how it impacts workers, the whole picture, not just oil and gas. Right now, like he pointed out, and it's true, the oil and gas companies are not going to give up on the stronghold they have right now. They're not going to give it up. So yes, I believe on what the gentleman said. That's why I pointed out earlier, as it relates to eminent domain and issues with property. When they come in, they drill, they make a big mess, and then they leave. Oh, sorry, we did what we did. We left our equipment, and I'm not compensated. In society, in life, when you mess up, and both of us are lawyers, when you mess up, you should be sued and you should be compensated if somebody did wrong. Those folks that do the drilling and leave the property and leave a big mess, not only in the property and the roads, hey, we understand, we believe, like we point out, give it an opportunity to make money, to do business, but you also got to do the right thing. Let me tell you about, free markets. We should do what's right. In Texas, we have and believe to do what's right. And remember, listen to the part. We should be smart. We should be smart. So you want to make business, we're fine. But you also got to do your part and be smart. What does that mean? Make money, but also if you hurt people like the gentleman is talking about, you should be compensated. Sure. If you mess up on the roads, they should be compensated.
Ms. Castaneda, I'd ask you to weigh in on that as well, but I would throw this in that you do have a Republican electorate and I think a Democratic electorate in Texas that certainly doesn't want to, I think this is pretty balanced through both parties in this state, and maybe a small part of the Democratic Party would disagree. But you do have a sense that government shouldn't be adversarial with business, that they shouldn't be enemies, right? That government can be a check on these businesses. And to this guy's point, Ron, who asked the question, he's got a frustration. He thinks government ought to step in, and there's certainly times that that's appropriate. But what's the balance there that needs to be struck so that the government is doing its job properly, and that a Democrat could be elected to the seat, somebody who maybe isn't seen as somebody who's going to go in there and be anti-industry? Because I'm not really hearing you say that you are.
I am not anti-industry. I firmly believe that industry can and needs to do better, and we need to enforce the regulations that have been on the books. I liken this question to bowling. probably everybody who's watching this has been bowling at least once. And, you know, you can roll that ball pretty much down the center of the lane, or maybe it goes a little to the right, or maybe you're like me and I'm not that great a bowler. And sometimes it goes into the gutter, but you know what? Those rails keep it between the lane that you need to be in. Those rails are protecting you from going outside of it. That's the function of good government. And good government also sets a direction. It's not, we have to start where we are now to do the things that we need to be doing, but we also need to set it going in the right direction. Going in the right direction would include enforcing the laws that we are already talking about, against flaring, against wasting water. I've been trying to type some answers into the questions as my opponent is speaking, and I would love to answer these in more detail if they're asked out loud, or you can email me at info@ChrystaForTexas.com, and it's CHRYSTA for Texas.com, all spelled out. I'm happy to take your questions, and I hold a virtual town hall about these issues every Tuesday from 5 to 6 on Zoom, and I will answer all of these questions there if we don't get them answered tonight.
Yeah, I think to extend on your bowling analogy, it's like when my daughter was little, we would take her bowling, and sometimes if government is acting, or if the business is acting irresponsibly like a little kid, you might have to put the bumpers down so that they stay where they're supposed to be. Let's see if we can do one of these live here. Gloria has a question. I'm hitting the answer live button, but I'm not sure if it's going to work that way. Let me give it a second. No, I'm just going to read it. She would like to know, Gloria would like to know, since you're both lawyers and seem to agree basically on the issues, what proposals would you put forward that maybe distinguishes you from the other candidate? I know that you've spoken in forums before. Mr. Alonzo, are there certain things that you disagree with Ms. Castaneda about, something that you would put forward you think that she wouldn't support?
First, on the answer to your question, proposal. A lot of the questions that have been coming up from the audience and I believe from the membership is that the public should have an input on what's going on with the Railroad Commission. So just like, you know, the insurance department, the insurance agency has a public counsel. I would support and would force that we have a public counsel within the Railroad Commission, that independent of the oil and gas company, independent of the Railroad Commission, that they advocate for the public counsel. But let me follow up with a comment about governance, about governance. You know, everybody should do what's right. In fact, it makes me think, I'm not preaching, I'm just saying, because I use this a lot to try to, you know, make a good point. And in the Bible, it says, give unto God what is God and Caesar what is Caesar. So in a way, it's saying we should do what's right. We should do what's right. But, you know, if you don't do what's right, let's move over to Caesar. Caesar's the government. That's why we have a Railroad Commission. We should have free market, you know, free markets, and everybody should do the right thing. But the reason we're government is because we got to keep an eye on what's going out there. We have laws. If you speak, there's a police officer give you a ticket. You have a right to go to court. It's called governance. And let me tell you, I believe in working with folks. I believe with working with the government. I believe in working with industry. And my history shows it. And what happens, folks, is we run for office, we win or lose. And then when you get in government, you got to govern. And let me tell you this, in the 20 years that I was in the legislature, you look at that, the last 6 years, I was on calendars. We had 50 Democrats, 100 Republicans. The most powerful committee in the House of Representatives is calendar. How do you get to be on calendars unless you say, we, the leadership, I was in the leadership with 50 Democrats and 100 Republicans, because the Speaker of the House, Joe Strauss, working in a coalition with Republicans and Democrats, said, okay, we're not going to be extreme, you know, on either side. We're going to govern. We're going to look at what's right, and let's be fair. And I've grown up in that experience. So right now we're running for office, trying to distinguish which is a better candidate. In the end, this is about governance, like was pointed out. What is good government? Good government is no is having people on the commission that knows about governing. And I've got that background. I thank Speaker Strauss, Republican from San Antonio, work with Republicans and Democrats to govern. We govern working together and getting it right, getting it right. We need to be smart on what's right. And that now comes to the Railroad Commission. But, you know, we have an opportunity. And again, I thank Beto for giving us that opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's going to be a bipartisan situation if things are going to get done. If things are going to get done, right? I mean, you can have a situation where it's, you know, Republicans and Democrats just at each other's throats, and that can be at the commission, that can be at the legislature, and then proposals end up as part of a legislative sort of killing field or a regulatory killing field because they get proposed, but then they don't happen, right? In this process, it either happens where people work together or that thing doesn't happen. Is the way that it often works, you know, in government, the way it always works in the legislature. Executive branch can be a little bit different. But we've talked about eminent domain. On the question of pipeline routing, specifically on the process for where they go, with the routing process, there's a lot of questions about that. You know, if you talk to landowners, talk to various stakeholders about the way that'll work. Ms. Castaneda, do you have specific thoughts on any reforms for that process, the way it ought to be handled, that it's not done now?
Well, yeah, and I think I mentioned this earlier. The routing of pipelines is not a Railroad Commission function. What the Railroad Commission currently has jurisdiction to do is make sure that if there are water crossings, that the casing is the right thickness, that the insulation is correct, that the pits through which the pipeline is laid are protected in the right way. There are a number of things they can do to protect water and other resources as the intrastate pipelines traverse the state of Texas, but they don't have a say on where these pipelines get laid. But can I come back to, I really wanted to answer the question that I didn't get to answer, which is what distinguishes me from Mr. Alonzo, and it is this. There is a reason why every newspaper in the state of Texas that has endorsed in my race has endorsed me, and it's because I actually know what it is that I want to accomplish at the Railroad Commission, and I have concrete policy proposals to do it. They're on my website at ChrystaForTexas.com. I've laid out the issues, I've laid out the things that need to be taken care of, and I intend to work on it from day one. Because I started running on this flaring issue, they're already acting on my ideas. I have moved the needle on flaring, and the Railroad Commission is holding hearings because I am talking about the issue. I started running on this issue day one, put up my video on my website in October, and we are already moving the needle. So in terms of a difference, there is a tangible difference. I'm not going to be needing to, I'm going to be asking the hard questions, not simply just reading papers and trying to figure out what to do. I already know how to ask these hard questions because I have worked in and around the industry, and I've worked against the industry, including in winning a $146 million verdict against industry players right in the heart of oil company in Pecos, Texas. And finally, I just want to say, because I see it in the comments, it is against the law to flare. It has been against the law to flare for 100 years. You can only flare a well for up to 10 days after you bring a well online. The only way that the oil companies get to flare wells is because they are granted exception permits. And at the Railroad Commission, the Republicans grant the exception permits without challenge until now. They are starting to take a look at this issue because I have been talking about it.
Right. There's a difference in the way the debate is playing out. No question. You see that in the headlines. You see it everywhere. We talked about pipelines, talked about eminent domain. You mentioned water as a resource. And let me stay with you, Ms. Castaneda. Are things that are not happening now that could be done pretty quickly? What are those things? What are the changes that you would make to try to protect water as a resource?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Especially in a state growing as fast as Texas, we still have, I mean, pre-pandemic, we still had 1,200 people moving to Texas every day. I think the U-Hauls have slowed down, but at some point that's going to start again, right? As the economy picks back up. What do we need to be doing to protect these resources?
So one of the things I talk about most frequently is the need to reuse and reclaim water. When wells are fracked, which is the process of splitting open the rock to allow the oil and gas to flow, millions and millions of gallons of fresh water are used in that process. And then some operators simply dispose of it into a saltwater disposal pit. And those saltwater disposal wells are sometimes located too close to fault lines and cause earthquakes. So we're both wasting the water and we're using it in a way and disposing of it a way that creates earthquakes. We need to incentivize the reclamation and reuse of that water so that we are not pulling more water from ever precious and dwindling water supplies, whether it's groundwater or aquifers or surface water. And we need to make sure that we are not disposing of it down holes simply because that's the cheapest and most expedient thing to do. That's my number one water proposal.
What do you think, Mr. Alonzo?
I believe we already have tons of rules about what we can do to fix a problem, but I think the key part, which is what the audience is talking about, that we enforce, you know, if they're doing wrong, to stop it. If they're causing pollution, to stop it. If they're causing damages, to provide the damage for the people that are hurting. So I believe we have opportunity to do that. We just want to make sure that we follow through. But I want to follow up with a comment about distinguishing the different candidates. We're not running.
I had a feeling you'd have a thought
Republican.
about that.
Sorry.
Yes, well, you did get to answer that earlier, but I had a feeling you'd come back to that.
Yes. Well,
being a cynical
and the reason
journalist
I'm bringing it up is to come up again. We're not running against a Republican right now. We're running amongst ourselves. The newspapers supported Republicans and supported Democrats. And in fact, the Republicans have already chosen their candidate. They even supported a candidate, as you pointed out, that spent like $12,000. This is a $2 million race, folks. $2 million. The most each of us is going to spend is $100,000. Why are we here at this level? Because of what you pointed out. The bigger picture is Beto. Beto created the opportunity. Second, in this election cycle, the election was about the presidential candidate, Biden and Sanders. And thank you, they've come together. We're going to support the Democratic candidate. I was a Biden supporter. I respect the Sanders people, but we're coming together to support our candidate. After this election is over, I'm a Democrat, but we're not running against the Republicans right now. We're running amongst ourselves to select a better candidate. And who is the better candidate? The one that has democratic values, the one that knows about governance, the one that knows about working with coalition, the one that's been endorsed by 240,000 union members. 240,000 union members. I got 500,000. One of the other fellas that was in the election, Mark Watson, he got hundreds of thousands of votes. He supports me. Right now, we're in the Democratic primary, distinguishing not between Republicans and Democrats. We're running. The main guy we're running against right now is Trump, but he's not in this election. We're selecting the best Democratic candidate. Thank you.
Yeah. Because there were several questions about this, I do want to drill down on it and make sure that you're crystal clear about your positions on the common carrier status and whether you think that that is being abused right now. I mean, what is your overall overarching statement about that, Ms. Castaneda?
Yeah, so common carrier status has been very easy to claim through checking a box at the Texas Railroad Commission with a particular form. I think it's the P4 or the T4. The problem is that's not just a matter of state law. It's also a matter of the Commerce Clause of the United States Constitution and a whole body of common law that is frankly very complicated. We need to do a better and more thorough review of all of the regulations that we can control here in the state of Texas to, again, let's go back to transparency, let's go back to oversight, let's go back to letting landowners know what's happening in and around their land before it's too late. That's something that the legislature can clearly do, and we can definitely take a look at what are the indicia of a common carrier, as the court was just willing to do against Enterprise. That was a favorable decision for you landowners relating to when a pipeline can claim the power of eminent domain and pay you less than what would have to be paid in terms of a fair market value easement. That was a good decision for you all. The problem is it's one decision, and we need a more holistic approach, and it needs to come at the Texas legislature. Again, I can't stress how important it is to make sure that we elect somebody who knows how to do the job that we are currently running for. This is not a legislative job. The most important thing that the Texas Railroad Commissioners can do is to follow the laws that we already have and to press for laws that need to be enacted at the legislature. But knowing the difference is key. And so that's what I'd suggest we do.
Mr. Alonzo, on that question of common carrier status, is that being abused, do you think?
Yes, as pointed out, there's a process that, you can easily get approved, but it comes back to, I'm a legislator, 20 years. That's my title, but it's not really legislative. It's called governing. When you get to be on the Railroad Commission, you're going to make decisions on all kinds of issues. For 20 years, we make decisions on roads, transportation, public health, education, and oil and gas. A lot of complicated issues, a lot. More complicated just with dealing with oil and gas. So you get a chance to decide of a person that has a grounded background, a Democrat legislative background. We're running for Democrat Railroad Commissioner, not oil and gas commissioner, Democrat, the Democratic candidate. So yes, right now it's being abused, but we need to keep an eye on it. I've supported, ways to fix it, but we gotta support within the Railroad Commission that it be enforced. And second, of course, support laws within the legislature. And I understand. And who is the better guy that understands, the better person that understands the legislative process like you talked about? Right now, we're running, we gotta win, and then we gotta govern. I understand that. Within, and I can tell you, and I'm so happy that last 6 years of the Speaker of the House, Joe Strauss, gave me an opportunity to be on calendars, to be in a way to make decisions for the whole state. I believe, and I sincerely believe it, I'm here as a candidate for the whole state of Texas, not just for oil and gas companies.
We're going to wrap up here at about 7 o'clock. So if you have questions, get those in here. I think we probably have time for just one more, which I was just looking at one that was in the Q&A box. They were asking this question: if you're in the minority party entering the Railroad Commission out of the 3 commissioners, how do you actually affect change on any of these things that you're talking about? And I would also just add this: once you get in there, it's the kind of thing you ask the President of the United States, but doesn't every politician look in the mirror and see, like kind of look and go, "Good morning, Mr. President or Mrs. President"? What is the thing you would focus on first 100 days in office as a newly sworn in railroad commissioner? Ms. Castaneda, what are the, big 2 or 3 things that you think you could run in there and tackle it head on from day one?
Right. Actually, I'm going to answer both your questions with the same answer. And that is this: flaring is against the law. It is an enormous waste of natural gas. And the only reason it gets done is because all 3 railroad commissioners consent to it being placed on consent agenda for these exception permits. Once I'm elected, they will not go through on consent agenda. We will have a discussion about what can be done better. Can you convert the flared natural gas to electricity right there and then at the well site, and not just simply light it on fire, polluting our air, polluting our water, and wasting our natural resources? That is something I can do from day one, and I am so proud of my campaign for having already made an impact on that issue. It's a tremendous thing to think, just by the fact of standing up and talking about an issue, that you can actually have an impact in a way that's beneficial to all of Texans. And I know we're at a close here, but I just want to stress this. I am running to represent all of Texas. I'm running to represent the people in rural counties who have surface that is impacted by oil and gas extraction. I'm running to serve the people of Houston who have a better need for more reliable electricity that's generated from cleaner fuels. I have a desire to represent all of Texas in our attempts to move towards better. We can make a better Texas together, and I want to be your elected railroad commissioner in order to do that. And I thank you for your time tonight.
All right, Mr. Alonzo, same question.
So I believe we can all work together, get it done. But I also believe that there's a difference. We're not running for Republican railroad commissioner. We're running for Democratic railroad commissioner. But once we get there, the first thing that I would do is work with folks. One of the things, Scott, that you've noticed, you have people that come in brand new, they've got all the answers, they're gonna fix all the problems. Well, you don't have to run for railroad commissioner to fix it. If you can fix it now, then stay there. There's another way you can fix problems. You can file lawsuits, stay there. You don't have to run. But I'll tell you this, folks, and Scott can point this out. Through the years, we've had freshmen, new people come in, they know all the answers. They're gonna fix the problems because they work so hard to get there. And you know what people do? They let them think it. They make them believe they can think it. But in the end, there's a process. There's a way to work together. So I'll tell you, the most important thing that's gonna be, all these things that we're talking about, it's already decided. Flaring, pipelines, it's decided. The way you get it done, is working together. So we're gonna run, we're gonna debate, we'll have difference of opinion, different people, the unions, 240,000 support me. The people will decide on July 14th. Then we're gonna run in November. But when we get, like you pointed out, what is the first thing to do is to work together. The fighting is over. Now let's govern. Let's do what's smart. Let's do what's right to do for the state of Texas. And I'll tell you the comment about the consent agenda and the fighting agenda. It happens. In the Texas legislature, we have local consent. All you gotta do is cough and the bill dies. That's it. And the local consent. And I know how to work that process. And then you have the debate. Well, you gotta work with people. So it's not that just you stop the consent. If you wanna get it done, guess what? That doesn't mean that you win. Now you gotta work together to make it done. It's called governance. It's called working together. It's doing what's right for Texas. One of the best elected officials in the state was Bob Bullock, who talked about, let's do what's right for Texas. What's right for Texas. Let's make, we need to look at the big picture. I've been there, I worked it, and I know we have, and I've won and lost, and we win and lose because we run for office. But once we get to the table, once we get to the decision makers, we got to work together to govern. Folks, I can tell you this. It can happen. Right now, we're not at that level. We're running for office. We all think we're good. We got to get the votes to get us elected, to get to the next level in November. And again, I tell you, the person that made us get here was a guy named Beto, who spent $80 million going around the state saying, Democrats, it's time for you to step up. I'm giving you opportunity. So again, I say thank you, Beto.
Like you said, sometimes in government, all that has to happen for a proposal to just die is for people to just talk for a long time. You can always find a politician to do that, right? We have killed an hour here. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks to Chrysta Castaneda, to Roberto, Beto, Alonzo. I appreciate you both very much. And Jessica, I would hand it back over to you after you unmute your computer there so we can wrap up this show. Thanks very much for having me tonight.
Thank you, Scott. We really appreciate your time. Chrysta, Beto, thank you so much for coming on and speaking to our 600 plus members strong at TRED who represent landowners from all over the state. And this will be something that you help regulate for all landowners. And we're grateful for the opportunity to visit with you and get a better sense of what your stance is on some of our crucial landowner issues. So we appreciate it. Thank you very much and best of luck.
Good night.